All right, so next let me go to Bob Davidson to hear about his workshop tips and tools. Bob, this is really becoming a very, very interesting part of the show that a lot of people are really favorably impressed with.
Well, I appreciate that. And, as someone who's only lost a few fingers in the shop, I'm happy to do this. So.
Well, they keep talking about whiskers. I don't know what they're talking
about. Let's share the screen here and get this going. So yeah, this is Workshop Tips and Tricks with Bob Davidson. That's me. Old theatrical and scenic designer, lighting designer, etc. Build a lot of exhibits and things like that, and I love playing with trains. Tonight we're talking about making the cut, and we're just going to be talking about blades of different types, choppers and stuff. We're not going to be talking about water jets and things like that, laser cutters, etc. Although I'm starting to get into that, but. So what we will be talking about are subtractive cutters or saws, and then compressive cutters or blades. So let's start off with saws. Remember, sawing removes material to make a cut. So whether you're using a handsaw or a power saw, there's going to be a loss of materials. And all saw blades have a kerf, which is the thickness of the cut. So you need to plan out your cutting, This is like the guy who used to work in our shop who didn't know why he couldn't get 3 16-inch wide rips out of a sheet of plywood. Well, because you're losing at least an eighth of an inch on every cut. So a lot of large sheet goods come oversized. Melamine specifically comes oversized, usually 49 by 97. So some things accommodate that, but most you need to keep in mind that a blade is going to have thickness. So there are lots of different power saws out there, jigsaws, you can see here, table saw, jigsaw circular saws, cutoff saws, saber saws, band saws, all kinds of saws. So, and then there's all kinds of hand saws to use, and they all have different purposes. So you want to familiarize yourself with what kind of saw you have. Here you see, a rip saw, crosscut saw, miter saw, which has the very flat bottom, square end, which will work with a miter box, some razor saws, hack saws, things like that. So do familiarize yourself with that. Basically, there's two different types of blades. The first we'll look at real quick is just circular saw blades. You can see here there's a lot of different types of tooth sets, and a lot of them will have expansion. They're literally expansion joints to allow sawdust to chip away. But the general rule is the more teeth you have, the smoother the cut. So typically, heavy rip blades are going to be very coarse, and then plywood blades and finished blades are going to have a lot more teeth on them, a 60 tooth, 80 tooth blade. There's also different tooth sets. So when you buy a circular blade, there's a bunch of different grinds to the teeth on a blade. I'm not going to get into it, but they all have, go back and read this slide, when it's up on YouTube. So, the triple chip grind is a more multi-purpose. Also, the alternate bevel blade is a multi-purpose blade. But there are specific rip blades and crosscut blades. There are blades that are made more for melamine and laminate, so they don't chip out as much. So again, you just want to familiarize yourself. Ask the person if you can find somebody at a home store who knows anything to make a suggestion. And then flat or linear saw blades, again, you'll have different tooth sets. And again, the general rule is more teeth will be a smoother cut. On the left here is kind of a chart of band saws. And you can see the thinner the blade gets, so this is 3 millimeter, an 1/8 inch blade, you'll have much more teeth, and you'll also be able to do a much tighter radius. So that's important to keep in mind, certainly with band saws. With saber saws and also, with tiger saws or whatever, you can see here you're going to have different tooth sets, a rough, what they call fast wood, clean wood. We talked before when I talked about power tools, you have upcuts and downcut blades. So if you're using a finished piece of, you want to keep the top good, use a down cut blade. It's going to throw the chips out the bottom of the sheet. There's also smooth blades. There's lots of times that I'll actually use a metal blade on veneer because it'll give a very fine cut. So all these choices you have when you're looking at blades. There are specialty saws and blades, Japanese saws, which are draw saws. Typically, they will cut on the back stroke, not on the front stroke. And they're real good for flush cutting. If you're ever setting a dowel or something like that, or just need to get in real tight on something. Knife blades, you can get knife blades for saber saws. And these are real good for cutting foam and stuff like that. They slice through it real nice. Anybody who has watched maybe Ken Patterson's web show there where he cuts styrofoam with a chainsaw, that's not how to do it. Diamond blades also, which you'll use with a scroll saw, which are good for cutting plastics and things like that. So again, use the right blade for the right material with the right tool, and it should work out good for you. So the sawing rules: use the right saw for the job, clear your work area. The worst thing you want to be doing is tripping over something or have the stock that you're trying to work with, even if it's as small as it is when we're doing modeling work. Have a clean area. Support or clamp what you're cutting. And what you want to do is support or clamp the finished side, not the offcut, but the side you want to save. Square your saw, regardless of whether if you do have a bandsaw or certainly a chop saw or something like that, take the time, square it off, make sure it's cut and square for you. And then just some simple things: never leave a power saw running, wear eye and ear protection, and use a sharp blade. Power saws, hand saws, they get dull as well. So if you have somebody around who can sharpen them for you, that's great. Do it. If not, throw them out and get a new blade. Some old saws about sawing. So the first one, thanks to my father, always said, let the saw do the work. You never want to push wood. You know, you want to find that speed to go through. Those of you who maybe watch HGTV, Hometown, Ben Napier has a great one: measure once, cuss twice. So always measure twice, make sure what you're doing. We'll get into some things where we talked about tape measures before, how inaccurate they can be. And finally, and I've heard this a lot, I cut it, and it's still too short. So if you do have a problem with a cut, start over, collect yourself, remeasure, and get it right maybe the second time. Blades and shears. Blades and shears compress material to make the cut. So what you're doing is actually breaking bonds of molecules as you cut through something. There's all different kinds of knives and blades. Single-edge razor blades are very common. Utility or mat knives, X-Acto knives. Click knives, which originally were called Olfa knives, which are the ones where you get like 11 different blades and you'd snap them off as you go. Scalpels, people use just about anything with a sharp edge to work, certainly with the model making materials that we're using. Knife edge type. So this is looking at not at the side view of a blade. You know, this is not an 11 blade. What we're looking at is the profile of the actual blade itself. So a section through the blade. And you can see most blades come to a point on both sides. A majority of the blades you're going to use, razor blades, etc., are V-ground blades. So they're ground on both sides. Another blade that we're going to talk about tonight is the chisel blade, and I'll show you why. And these are available, and I'll show you where to get them. So the way a V-ground knife will cut through a piece of material is as you put pressure or draw it along, it has to displace, and these are exaggerated views, but it has to displace the material where the blade is going. And what that'll do is it'll create these little bumps. Eventually, you'll cut through your material, but notice on both sides, you have a beveled edge. And it may be minuscule, but you will have a beveled edge. So if you are doing V-ground knife cutting, you need to And that's true of like these, choppers. You need to keep that in mind, and we'll get to that a little bit in the rules for this. So here's what, the choppers that are out there, and there's a bunch of different brands of them, etc. But this is a lot, mostly what you're going to find, the actual chopper here. And this is a knockoff that's sold on Amazon. You want to, again, hold down the finished piece. Don't worry about the offcut. Let it go. If it's going to fall to the floor, let it fall to the floor. Hold down your finished piece to support it. Cut long and sand to the finished length because you are cutting on an angle. So you need to square it up and also get it to the length that you want. And also on some things, and it's not true on real thin veneers, but certainly if you've cut styrene, you can feel the bump along the cut edge. So you need to sand the surface to remove the cut bump. So another way to cut stuff is with a chisel knife edge. So on this side is the measured piece, on this side is the scrap piece. When we use a chisel knife, we're only displacing material on one side. So our cut piece, when we go through our measured piece, our good side, is going to cut square. The offcut piece is going to have that bevel and the bump in it. Where do you use this? Well, our good friend Al Collins up at Ultimation. I have one of these. Greg, I know, has one of these. I saw it when Greg did a demo on this program, and I started bugging Al immediately. And I think I got the first one off the production line once he started. It's a phenomenal cutter. I'm not going to make this into an advertisement for it, but what's nice about the Ultimation slicer is, let me go back just a second here. With these, you're kind of stuck to the templates that they give you. So you have a 30-degree cut, a 45-degree cut, a 60-degree cut. With the slicer, it's an adjustable ring. So you can set this for any angle that you may need. And you can see here, he's clearly labeled your square side of the cut and the off side of the cut. The blade's up in here, and the blade is a single-sided ground chisel blade, but it's a standard mat blade, so it'll fit into a mat knife. You can buy the blades, and I have taken a blade and put it on one of my old choppers. So these blades are, I think, $5 a pack, and you can get them at ultimation.ca up in Canada. So highly recommend, even if you don't want to make the investment in the tool, make the investment in the blades. It really does make a difference in how you cut things. Chisel knife rules. Before you can cut your finished piece, you need to make sure that both sides are square. So you want to make sure you're starting with a square edge at the dead side of your finished piece. Make sure your finished piece is on the square, unground side of the blade. You can reverse the blade if you're cutting long stock on the slicer. And hold down the finished piece. Don't worry about the offcut. Let it fall or roll away or whatever. Some pointed thoughts, and this is true for both. Let the blade do the work. A lot of times, even with styrene, I'll score with the back edge of a knife blade first, just so it'll keep it on line, okay? Then I'll flip over to the cutting edge. Slow and steady. If it takes 5, if it takes 10 passes, so be it. Change your blades often, throw them out. We all set them aside and say, oh, I'll use that on something that something that doesn't matter. Just throw them out. Put away knives when not in use. Last week we heard about the knife rolling off the table, so we don't want that to happen. And then protect your eyes and fingers, especially with those click knives. They shatter. Okay, they will shatter, and when they shatter, they bounce. So do be careful with that. So that's our kind of trip through that. Our tool of the week this week, here's a cheap one, so you don't have to raid the piggy bank. These are cleaning picks that are made for for taking care of guns. I'm a trap shooter and skeet shooter, and I've started using these to clean the action on some of my guns. They're also phenomenal for like getting glue out of tight spaces. and you know, smoothing out joints and things like that. And
Yep.
369, you get 4 different ones. They're made out of nylon, so they're real easy to keep clean from the glue. So I highly recommend this. Like say, under $4, you can't go wrong. Now this is kind of neat. This week's neat website, decoratorssupply.com. I'll give you a little backstory. When my wife and I were married about 5 years, we restored an 1890s Queen Anne mansion. And at the time I was working in the theater and we found Decorators Supply. What Decorators Supply does is they make recreations of all the old style plaster ornaments. And while you're not going to buy these, it's a phenomenal resource if you want to research, you're doing an interior finish or an exterior molding or whatever. They have, like here, exterior ornaments, cabinetry. When you go in, you're going to see all kinds of pictures of stuff. It's just a great resource for for looking at some details that you may want to put in to spice up a model. You can also download their catalogs. They have all different kinds of catalogs. You can just download them as PDFs. So really recommend that you look at this. It's a lot of fun, especially if you're doing period work. I'm working in the modern era, so there's not a lot of use for me, but if you're working back in the 1800s, early 1900s, just a great resource. And if you live in an old house, it's a great resource too. So that's this week's website. Next week, we're going to do Dremel time. We'll look at attachments, jigs, and some surprises for everybody. So that'll be next week's episode. And I will stop the share and ask if there's any questions or comments or whatever. Okay.
Bob, I have a question. Oh,
Yeah, sure.
one question. Hey, you mentioned, this is really off topic, I'll go fast. The blades that you got from Ultimation, and I've got some of their tools.
Yeah.
You said I had just previously bought a chopper right before their chopper came out. Unmodified, you can use their blades in the chopper, or do you have to modify them?
You don't have to modify the blade, but you have to modify the chopper arm. So you'll have to drill a hole and you know how you have those little thumb screws?
Yeah.
So you may have to drill and tap a hole.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bob, I think you did a fantastic job, sir. Thank you very much.
Well, you're too kind.